Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day, we put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark, and if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Attention has become currency, has become the raw material that corporations extract and refine and sell. And this transformation happened quietly, happened gradually, happened so smoothly that most people did not notice they were becoming the product, did not realize that their consciousness had been colonized, that the hours of their lives were being auctioned to the highest bidder, that every moment of awareness was being monetized by platforms designed not to inform or connect or entertain, but to harvest, to capture, to hold the gaze for as long as possible and convert that holding into profit. And the genius of this system is that it does not feel like exploitation, does not feel like theft, feels instead like choice, like freedom, like the vast menu of options that modernity provides. But the choice is curated, is algorithmically optimized, is designed to keep the user inside the platform, inside the feed, inside the cycle of stimulus and response that generates data. And the data is what matters. The data is what gets sold. The clicks and scrolls and pauses and searches that reveal preferences, reveal psychology, reveal the patterns that allow prediction. And prediction is control, is the ability to shape behavior, to nudge decisions, to make certain choices more likely than others. And this happens below the level of awareness, happens in the gap between stimulus and response, happens so quickly that by the time consciousness arrives to claim authorship of the decision has already been made, has been influenced by factors that were carefully engineered to be invisible, to operate in the blind spots of perception. And the engineers are not evil, are not villains, are just optimizing, are just doing what they are hired to do, which is maximize engagement. And engagement is measured in time, in how many minutes per day the user spends inside the system. And the system is very good at maximizing this metric, has been refined through millions of iterations, has been tested on billions of users, has discovered principles of human psychology that academic researchers never found, because researchers have ethics committees and platforms have incentives, and the incentive is to find the exact frequency of reward that keeps behavior going, the exact ratio of novelty to familiarity that prevents habituation, the exact level of difficulty that maintains interest without causing frustration, and these parameters are adjusted in real time, are personalized for each user, are tuned to the individual vulnerabilities that the data reveals. And what the data reveals is that humans are predictable, are hackable, are machines that respond to inputs in ways that can be modeled and exploited. And the exploitation is not illegal, is not even considered unethical by the standards of the industry, is just business, just capitalism, just the market finding new territory to colonize. And the territory is consciousness, is the hours of the day that used to be empty, used to be boring, used to be filled with thought or rest or staring at walls. And these empty hours were not profitable, were not monetizable, were waste from an economic perspective, and so they had to be filled, had to be captured, had to be converted into engagement. And the tools for this conversion are apps, are platforms, are devices that promise connection and deliver isolation, promise information and deliver distraction, promise empowerment and deliver addiction. And the addiction is not metaphorical, is not exaggeration, is literal, is the same neural pathways, the same dopamine dynamics, the same withdrawal symptoms that characterize substance addiction. And the platforms know this, have hired neuroscientists and psychologists to make the products more addictive, more compelling, more difficult to resist, and resistance is framed as weakness, as lack of self-control, as personal failing. But this framing obscures the asymmetry of power, obscures the fact that individuals are competing against teams of PhDs with unlimited resources and sophisticated tools. And in this competition, the individual always loses, always ends up scrolling, always ends up checking, always ends up giving the platform what it wants, which is attention. And attention is finite, is the one resource that cannot be manufactured or expanded, is strictly limited by the hours in a day and the capacity of the nervous system. And so the competition for attention is zero-sum, is a war where every platform is fighting every other platform, and all of them are fighting against sleep and work and relationships and anything else that might occupy consciousness. And the platforms are winning, are capturing more hours every year, are extending their reach into moments that used to be sacred, used to be protected, used to be offline. And offline is becoming a luxury, is becoming something only the wealthy can afford, because opting out requires discipline and alternatives and the knowledge that opting out is even possible. And most people do not have this knowledge, do not see the system, do not recognize that their attention is being farmed, and even those who do recognize it often cannot escape, cannot resist, because the platforms are too useful, too convenient, too integrated into the infrastructure of modern life. And to reject them is to reject participation, to accept isolation, to make life harder in exchange for autonomy. And most choose convenience over autonomy, choose connection over sovereignty, choose the platform over the void. And the void is what waits in the absence of stimulation, is what the constant connectivity is designed to prevent, is boredom, is the experience of being alone with the unoccupied mind. And boredom has become intolerable, has become something to be avoided at all costs. And the cost is attention, is consciousness, is the capacity to think without distraction, to feel without mediation, to simply be without needing external input. And this capacity is atrophying, is declining with each generation, is being bred out by an environment that never stops demanding response, that never allows rest, that treats every moment of inactivity as opportunity, as potential engagement that must be captured. And the capturing is called user experience, is called interface design, is called growth hacking. And these terms sanitize what is happening, make it sound technical rather than predatory, make it sound like optimization rather than exploitation. But the experience of the user is not optimized for the user, is optimized for the platform, is designed to extract maximum value from minimum input. And the value extracted is not just attention, but data, not just time, but information, not just engagement, but identity, because the platforms know things about their users that the users do not know about themselves, have models of personality and preference that are more accurate than self-report. And these models are sold, are licensed, are used to manipulate. And the manipulation is called advertising, but is really behavior modification, is the application of psychological principles to make certain actions more likely. And the actions are clicking and buying and voting and believing. And what is believed is whatever the algorithm decides to show. Whatever content the model predicts will generate engagement. And engagement means time, means attention, means the user staying inside the system. And the system has learned that outrage generates engagement, that fear generates engagement, that tribalism and conflict and moral certainty generate engagement. And so these are what the algorithm promotes, what the feed becomes filled with, not because the platform wants a more divided world, but because division is profitable, keeps people scrolling, keeps people arguing, keeps attention captured. And the captured attention is sold to advertisers who want to change behavior, who want to make people buy products they do not need, believe things that are not true, vote for candidates who do not serve their interests, and the system works, is terrifyingly effective. Has changed elections, has changed culture, has changed what people think is real, and reality is becoming whatever the algorithm amplifies, whatever goes viral, whatever captures attention long enough to become part of the discourse. And the discourse is not conversation but performance, not exchange but broadcast, not thinking but reacting. And reaction is what the system wants, is faster than reflection, is more primitive, is easier to predict and manipulate. And so the environment rewards reaction, punishes reflection, makes it difficult to think slowly, to consider carefully, to withhold judgment. And the result is a population that is always responding, always reacting, always engaged but never thoughtful, never deliberate, never in control of their own attention. And attention is the foundation of everything else, is what makes learning possible, makes relationships possible, makes meaning possible. And when attention is colonized, everything built on attention becomes precarious, becomes shallow, becomes vulnerable to collapse. And the collapse is already happening, is visible in the epidemic of anxiety and depression, in the inability to focus, in the fragmentation of identity, in the sense that life is accelerating, that there is never enough time, that something important is being lost, but it is not clear what or how to get it back. And what is being lost is sovereignty, is the right to one's own consciousness, the right to choose what to pay attention to, rather than having attention hijacked, manipulated, sold. And the platforms will say that users have choice, that no one is forced to use these services, that opting out is always possible. But this is disingenuous, is like saying that people choose to breathe polluted air because they could move, could leave the city, could find somewhere clean. And technically, this is true, but practically, it ignores the structure of power, ignores that the environment has been changed in ways that make certain choices extremely costly. That opting out of the attention economy means opting out of employment, education, social connection, civic participation. And so the choice is not really a choice, is coerced by circumstance, by the fact that the platforms have become infrastructure, have become the roads on which modern life travels. And to refuse them is to refuse modernity, to accept marginalization, and most cannot afford this refusal. And so they stay, keep scrolling, keep checking, keep giving away their attention, and receiving in return the feeling of being connected, being informed, being free, when really they are isolated, distracted, captured. And the freedom is the freedom of the hamster wheel, the freedom to run without going anywhere, the freedom to choose between options that have all been curated to serve the same end, and the end is profit, is the conversion of attention into money, is the monetization of consciousness itself. And this monetization was not possible before, was not technically feasible, required technologies that did not exist, required smartphones and algorithms, and the infrastructure to track and analyze and predict behavior in real time. And now that the infrastructure exists, it will not be dismantled, will not be voluntarily abandoned, because it's too valuable, too profitable, too central to the business models of the most powerful corporations in history. And these corporations are not accountable to users, are accountable to shareholders. And shareholders care about growth, care about returns, care about the numbers going up. And the numbers go up when engagement goes up, when attention is captured more effectively, when the competition is crushed and the market is monopolized. And monopoly is what has been achieved, is what the platform economy tends toward, because platforms benefit from network effects, from being where everyone else is. And this creates winner-take-all dynamics, creates situations where one or two platforms dominate, and alternatives cannot compete, cannot offer enough value to overcome the switching costs. And so the users are locked in, are prisoners of convenience, are unable to leave without losing access to the networks that have become essential. And the platforms know this, exploit this, degrade the experience slowly, introduce features that users hate but tolerate because the alternative is worse, is disconnection, and disconnection is unthinkable, has become synonymous with isolation, has become the thing that the attention economy promises to save us from while actually delivering it. Because connection through a screen is not connection, is simulation of connection, is the appearance without the substance, is the feeling without the reality. And the reality is that real connection requires presence, requires attention that is not divided, not distracted, not mediated by an algorithm that is optimizing for something other than the relationship. And such attention is becoming rare, is becoming a gift that few can afford to give, because attention is the thing being taken, is the thing being sold, is the thing that there is never enough of, because it is always being redirected, always being pulled toward the next notification, the next update, the next thing designed to capture and hold and extract, and the extraction is invisible, feels like nothing, feels like just a moment, just a quick check, just staying informed, but the moments accumulate, the checks compound, and hours dissolve into fragmented minutes, into broken attention that cannot sustain thought, cannot maintain focus, cannot build anything that requires depth or complexity or sustained engagement. And depth is what is being lost, is what the attention economy is incompatible with, because depth requires time, requires the ability to stay with difficulty, to tolerate confusion, to sit with questions that do not have immediate answers. And the platforms cannot tolerate this, cannot allow users to sit, must keep them moving, must keep them scrolling, must keep them in the state of perpetual seeking that never finds, perpetual consuming that never satisfies. And satisfaction is the enemy, is what would cause the user to stop, to disengage, to leave the platform. And so satisfaction must be prevented, must be deferred, must be replaced with the promise of satisfaction, with the feeling that the next thing will be the thing, the next scroll will reveal something worth the time. And this promise is never fulfilled, is never intended to be fulfilled, is the mechanism that keeps the machine running, keeps the user trapped in the loop. And escape requires recognizing the loop, requires seeing the mechanism, requires understanding that the feeling of freedom is the trap, that the choice is the cage, that the attention economy is not serving the user but is using the user, is extracting value and leaving behind exhaustion, fragmentation, the sense that life is happening somewhere else, to someone else, and the screen is a window onto that other life, but never a door, never a way through, only a way to watch, to consume, to experience vicariously. And vicarious experience is not experience, is its negation, is the replacement of doing with watching, of living with scrolling, of being with performing, and performance is what the platforms demand. Demand the curation of identity, the presentation of self that is always positive, always successful, always enviable, and this performance is exhausting, is alienating, is the source of the anxiety that drives people back to the platforms looking for relief. And the platforms provide relief in the form of more content, more distraction, more opportunities to forget that the self being performed is not the self being lived, that the gap between them is growing, that authenticity is becoming impossible in an environment that punishes vulnerability and rewards spectacle. And spectacle is what the algorithm amplifies. What goes viral, what captures attention at scale, and attention at scale is what matters, is what generates revenue, is what makes certain voices loud and others silent, and the silence is not absence but erasure, is the algorithmic decision that certain content does not generate engagement, does not deserve distribution, does not align with the platform's interests, and interests are commercial, are about keeping users inside the system, and anything that might cause users to leave, to think, to question, to disconnect, is deprioritized, is hidden, is effectively censored not by decree but by code, by the automated decisions of systems that have no conception of truth or value or importance, only of engagement, And engagement is the wrong metric, is optimizing for the wrong thing, is maximizing time spent rather than time well spent. And the distinction matters because not all attention is equal. Some attention is nourishing and some is depleting. Some makes life richer and some makes it poorer. But the algorithm cannot distinguish, does not care, measures only duration and intensity. And intensity is easy to generate through outrage, through fear, through the triggering of emotions that demand response. And so the feed becomes a stream of triggers, becomes designed to provoke, to upset, to capture attention through the primitive circuits that evolved to detect threat. And these circuits are not designed for the modern world, are designed for a world where threats were physical, immediate, escapable, not abstract, permanent, global, and the mismatch creates chronic activation, creates a state of perpetual vigilance that wears down the nervous system, that depletes resources, that makes rest impossible because the threats never stop, the feed never ends, the notifications never cease, and the only way to stop them is to disconnect, to turn off, to reclaim attention. But disconnection feels dangerous, feels like missing something, feels like falling behind, and falling behind is unacceptable in a culture that valorizes productivity, that measures worth in output, that treats every moment as resource to be optimized. And optimization means elimination of waste. And waste includes rest, includes boredom, includes the empty time that used to be when consciousness could wander, could explore, could discover itself. And this discovery is what is being prevented, is what the colonization of attention makes impossible. Because to know oneself requires attention turned inward, requires time that is not filled, requires boredom. And boredom is not absence, but presence, is the mind meeting itself without distraction, without mediation, without escape. And this meeting is where insight comes from, where creativity comes from, where meaning comes from. But the platforms cannot monetize insight, cannot sell creativity, cannot profit from meaning. And so these are sacrificed, are traded for engagement, for the illusion of productivity, for the feeling of being busy that is actually being used, being exploited, being colonized. And the colonization is complete when it becomes invisible, when it feels like nature, when the user cannot imagine life without the platform, cannot remember what attention felt like before it was captured, cannot conceive of consciousness that is not mediated, not monetized, not owned by someone else. And ownership is what has been achieved, is what the attention economy has accomplished, not through force but through design, through the slow accumulation of habits that become dependencies, through the gradual adjustment of expectations until constant connectivity feels normal and solitude feels strange. And strange is threatening, is to be avoided, is what the platform protects against, promises to eliminate, and the elimination is achieved, is total, is the end of privacy, the end of interiority, the end of the self that is not performing, not producing, not consuming. And what remains is the user, the node in the network, the data point in the model, the attention that is harvested and sold and never returned. And the question is whether this is sustainable, whether consciousness can survive colonization, whether attention can be extracted indefinitely without something breaking, and the breaking is already happening, is visible in the rising rates of mental illness, in the inability to be alone, in the desperation for distraction that feels like drowning, like suffocation, like something essential has been taken and cannot be recovered. And recovery would require resistance, would require the deliberate cultivation of boredom, the intentional creation of empty time, the radical act of doing nothing in a world that demands constant doing. And doing nothing is not laziness, but rebellion, is the refusal to participate, is the reclamation of sovereignty, is the assertion that attention is not for sale, that consciousness is not a resource, that the self has value independent of productivity, independent of engagement, independent of what can be extracted. And this assertion is difficult, is countercultural, is fighting against systems that are designed to prevent it. But it is possible, is necessary, is the only way to escape the colonization, to restore attention to its proper owner, to make consciousness sovereign again. And sovereignty is not isolation, but autonomy, is the right to choose, the right to refuse, the right to be bored, to be slow, to be present. And presence is what the attention economy destroys, is what cannot be monetized, is what makes life worth living. And without it, all the engagement in the world is empty, is meaningless, is just motion, just noise, just the sound of attention being sold. Knowledge of death's timing changes everything, converts the abstract certainty into concrete countdown, transforms mortality from philosophical concept into calendar date, into the number of days remaining, into the tangible approaching of an endpoint that was always coming but was kept safely distant by uncertainty, by the not knowing that allowed life to proceed as if time were infinite, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if the future extended indefinitely, even though reason knows it does not, knows it cannot, knows that death is certain and that the certainty will arrive. But the arriving felt distant, felt abstract, felt like something that happens eventually, but not yet, not soon, not on a specific date that can be marked on calendars, that can be counted down to, that can be known in advance with accuracy that is not perfect but is close enough, is 96%, is the probability that the algorithm assigns after analysing the data, after processing the medical records, the genetic information, the lifestyle factors, the environmental exposures, the family history, the biomarkers, the patterns that correlate with longevity, with disease, with the failures that lead to death, and the failures are predictable, are following patterns that machine learning can detect, can model, can use to generate predictions that are accurate enough to be actionable, to be used by insurance companies, by employers, by governments, by anyone who has access to the data and the algorithms. And the access is spreading, is becoming easier, is approaching the point where anyone can know their death date, can receive the prediction, can see the number, can confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what changes everything, is what transforms life from open-ended to finite, from abstract mortality to concrete deadline, from the someday of death to the specific day, the specific year, the specific age at which the algorithm predicts the ending will come. And the coming is what becomes real, becomes present, becomes the fact that shapes every decision, every plan, every moment, because the moments are numbered, are limited, are approaching zero, and the zero is known, is visible, is the date that appears on the screen after the algorithm processes the data, after the calculation completes, after the probability is assigned, and the probability is high, is 96%, is accurate enough that insurance companies are using it, are adjusting premiums based on predicted death dates, are denying coverage to those whose dates are too near, are charging more to those whose dates reveal risk, reveal vulnerability, reveal the likelihood of claims, and the claims are what matter to insurers, are what drive the calculations, are what make death dates valuable information, are what justify the investment in algorithms, in data processing, in the machine learning systems that can predict mortality with accuracy that exceeds human intuition, that surpasses clinical judgment. That is better than what doctors can do, what actuaries can estimate, what anyone could know before the algorithms existed, and the existence is recent, is new, is the result of advances in computing, in data collection, in the availability of medical records, genetic sequences, lifestyle data, all the information that used to be scattered, that used to be private, that used to be inaccessible, but is now consolidated, is now analysed, is now feeding the algorithms that predict death dates. And the predictions are accurate, are reliable, are being used, are shaping decisions, are affecting lives, are creating the knowledge, that was not available before, that humans did not have before, that changes what it means to be mortal, because mortality was always certain but was never scheduled, was never assigned a date, was never made concrete in the way that the algorithm makes it concrete, makes it specific, makes it countable. And the counting is what humans are doing, are responding to, are organising their lives around. Once they know, once they receive the prediction, once they see the date, and the seeing changes everything, makes priorities shift, makes some things urgent and other things irrelevant, makes the future feel different, feel shorter, feel like it is running out. And the running out is literal, is measurable, is the countdown that starts the moment the date is known, the moment the algorithm delivers its prediction. And the prediction is usually not exact, is usually a range, is usually giving a year rather than a day, but the year is specific enough, is concrete enough, is making death real in a way it was not real before. And the reality is what some cannot bear, is what drives some to ignore the prediction, to refuse the knowledge, to not ask for the date, to not run the algorithm, to maintain the uncertainty that allows life to feel open-ended, that allows the illusion of infinite time. And the illusion is functional, is protective, is what most humans need in order to function, in order to plan, in order to invest in futures that might not arrive. And the arrival is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates, is what it makes known. And the known is both liberation and burden, is both the gift of clarity and the curse of certainty. Because certainty about death is not like certainty about other things, is not providing comfort, is not making life easier, is making life harder, is making every moment weighted, is making every choice consequential, is creating the pressure of the countdown, of the limited time, of the approaching zero. And the zero is death, is the end point, is the date that the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping how people live. Once they know, once they receive the information, once they confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what matters, is what the algorithm creates, is the transformation of abstract mortality into concrete deadline. And the deadline is what changes behaviour, is what makes some people quit their jobs, leave their marriages, pursue dreams they had deferred, make radical changes in the hope that the changes will alter the prediction, will push the date further away, will buy more time. And the time is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes precious once it is known to be limited. Once the limit is visible, once the countdown begins, and the beginning is the moment of knowing, is the moment the prediction is delivered, is the moment the algorithm completes its calculation and displays the date. And the date is sometimes soon, is sometimes far, is sometimes already past, and the past is the strangest case. Is the situation where the algorithm predicts a death date that has already occurred, that has already passed, and the passing means the prediction was wrong, means the person has outlived their calculated mortality, has survived beyond what the algorithm expected, and the expectation was based on data, was based on patterns, was based on probabilities that apply to populations, but not necessarily to individuals. And the individual is what matters, is what the algorithm is trying to predict. But individuals vary, individuals are unique, individuals do not always follow the patterns, and the patterns are statistical, are probabilistic, are accurate for groups, but not always for persons. And persons are what the algorithm is being applied to, is being used on, is generating predictions for, and the predictions are mostly accurate, are right 96% of the time. But the 4% is significant, is the margin where the algorithm fails, where the prediction is wrong, where people die earlier than predicted or survive longer than predicted. And the longer is what some experience, is what creates the strange situation of living past one's predicted death date, of waking up on the day after the day that was supposed to be the last day. And the last day was not the last, was not the ending, was just another day, and the day after is another day, and the days continue, and the continuation is confusing, is disorienting, is raising questions about what the prediction meant, about whether it was wrong, about whether the algorithm failed, or whether something changed, whether the person's condition improved, whether the factors that were feeding the prediction shifted, and the shifting is possible, is part of what makes the predictions not fixed, not absolute, not carved in stone, but calculated from data that is current at the moment of calculation, but that changes, that evolves, that reflects conditions that can improve or deteriorate. And the improvement is what some people achieve, is what some people work toward, is the reason some people change their lifestyles. After receiving the prediction, after seeing the date, after confronting the countdown. And the countdown motivates, creates urgency, creates the pressure to change, to improve, to extend the time, to push the date further away. And the pushing is sometimes successful, is sometimes resulting in new predictions, in updated calculations, in revised death dates that are later than the original dates. And the later is what everyone wants, is what the changes are aiming for, is what makes people exercise, eat differently, reduce stress, stop smoking, address conditions that were being ignored, take medications that were being skipped, make appointments that were being postponed, all in the hope that the algorithm will notice, will incorporate the changes, will recalculate, will generate a new prediction with a later date. And the later is what some people achieve, is what some people see when they run the algorithm again, when they check the prediction, when they look for evidence that their efforts have mattered, have changed the trajectory, have bought time. And the time is what matters, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes visible through the prediction. And the prediction is not destiny, is not fate, is not fixed, is probability, is likelihood, is the best estimate based on data. But estimates can be wrong. Data can change, probabilities can shift. And the shifting is what makes the algorithm dynamic, makes the predictions update, makes the death dates change, sometimes moving closer, sometimes moving further, sometimes disappearing entirely when new data arrives, when conditions improve, when the patterns that were predicting early death are disrupted by interventions, by treatments, by changes that alter the trajectory. And the trajectory is what the algorithm models, is what it calculates, is what it uses to predict the future. And the future is uncertain, is probabilistic, is not determined, but is shaped by choices, by circumstances, by the countless factors that influence health, that affect longevity, that determine when death arrives. And the arriving is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates with 96% accuracy. But the accuracy is for populations, is statistical, is not guaranteed for individuals. And individuals are what matter, are who receive the predictions, are who live with the knowledge, are who face the countdown. And the countdown is real, is concrete, is making mortality tangible in a way it never was before. And the before was uncertainty, was the not knowing that allowed life to feel open-ended, that allowed plans to extend indefinitely, that allowed the future to seem guaranteed even though it was not, even though death was always certain, always approaching, always inevitable. And the inevitable is what the algorithm makes visible, makes specific, makes countable. And the counting is what changes everything, is what transforms life. Once the date is known, once the prediction is received, once the algorithm delivers its calculation, and the calculation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping insurance, shaping employment, shaping medical care, shaping decisions about treatment, about intervention, about whether to invest in extending life, when the extension is predicted to be brief, when the algorithm says the time is short, when the date is near, and the near is what matters, is what determines coverage, determines access, determines whether resources are allocated, whether treatments are approved, whether hope is offered or withheld. And the withholding is what some fear, is what the algorithm enables, is the denial of care based on predicted death dates, based on the calculation that says the investment is not worth it, that the time remaining is too brief, that the return is insufficient, and the return is measured in life years, in quality-adjusted survival, in the metrics that reduce existence to numbers, to calculations, to the outputs of algorithms that predict mortality and that are used to decide who receives treatment and who does not, who gets coverage and who is denied, who is worth investing in and who is not. And the not worth is the judgment that the algorithm makes possible, is the decision that becomes justifiable when death dates are known, when predictions are reliable, when accuracy is 96% and the percent is high enough to be trusted, to be acted upon, to be used as basis for decisions that affect lives, that determine futures, that shape who survives and who does not. And the survival is what matters, is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm is supposedly helping by predicting, by warning, by providing information that can be used to intervene, to prevent, to extend life. But the extension is not guaranteed, is not automatic, is requiring resources, requiring access, requiring the willingness to invest in futures that might be brief, that might not extend far beyond the predicted date. And the date is what hangs over everything, is what shapes decisions, is what makes some futures seem worth pursuing and others not. And the not worth is the category that some people are placed into once their death dates are known, once their predictions reveal short timelines, limited futures, approaching endpoints. And the endpoints are what the algorithm calculates, are what it makes visible, are what transform mortality from abstract to concrete, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is what changes everything, is. What makes death real is what creates the countdown, the pressure, the urgency, the weight of limited time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date that the algorithm predicted, and the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is right 96% of the time. And the time is what matters, is what is being counted, is what is being lost, is what is approaching exhaustion, and the exhaustion is death, is the end point, is the zero that the countdown reaches and the reaching is inevitable, is certain, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what the death date represents. And the representation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping reality, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from philosophical abstraction into calendar appointment, into the date that is marked, that is known, that is approaching, and the approaching is what matters, is what changes everything, is what makes the algorithm powerful, is what makes the prediction consequential, is what transforms knowledge of death date from curiosity into burden, from information into weight, from prediction into reality. And the reality is that death is approaching, is scheduled, is calculated, is known. And the knowing changes everything, makes every moment count, makes every decision matter, makes life feel urgent, finite, precious, limited. And the limited is what the algorithm reveals, is what the death date represents, is what 96% accuracy means, which is that the countdown is real, is reliable, is approaching the end, and the end is death. Is the date, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what some people know, is what some people live with, is what some people count down to. And the counting is real, is happening, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from abstraction to appointment, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the death date that is calculated, that is displayed, that is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date, and the date is death, is the end point, is what the algorithm predicts, is what some people know, is what changes everything, is the countdown, is the calculation, is the algorithm that predicts death date with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what matters, is what makes the prediction real, is what makes mortality concrete, is what makes death a date, a number, a countdown, and the countdown is happening, is real, is approaching zero, is moving toward death. And death is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is approaching. And the approaching is certain, is reliable, is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is what remains, is what is counted, is what is running out. And the running out is death, is the date, is what the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is real, is the countdown to death, to the end point, to the zero. And the zero is approaching, is certain, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is predicted by the algorithm with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what makes it real, what makes it matter, what makes death a date. And the date is approaching, is certain, is the countdown, is the algorithm, is the prediction, is death. Language shapes thought, shapes what can be conceived, what can be expressed, what can be hidden, and most languages allow hiding, allow the gap between what is thought and what is said, allow the performance of statements that do not correspond to internal states that present as true what is known to be false, that create the possibility of deception, of lying, of the mismatch between inner and outer that is fundamental to social existence as it is currently lived. But what if language did not allow this mismatch? What if the grammar itself prevented the expression of anything except what is actually believed, what is actually experienced, what is actually the case from the speaker's perspective? Not objective truth, which is unknowable, but subjective honesty, which is the correspondence between what is felt and what is said. And the correspondence would be mandatory, would be built into the structure of the language, into the syntax that determines what can be grammatically formed, what sentences are possible, and the possible would exclude any statement that the speaker does not believe, that does not match the speaker's internal state, that constitutes a lie. And lying would not be immoral in such a language, but would be impossible, would be ungrammatical, would be like trying to form a sentence that violates the rules of syntax, that cannot be uttered, not because it's forbidden, but because it's not a sentence in the language, is not something that the grammar allows, and the allowing is what determines what can be thought, what can be expressed, what can be communicated. And if the grammar does not allow lying, then lying becomes not just difficult, but inconceivable, becomes not something that is avoided through moral effort, but something that is impossible through structural constraint. And the constraint is liberating in one sense and terrifying in another, is eliminating the burden of deciding whether to lie, of managing impressions, of performing honesty while concealing dishonesty, but is also eliminating privacy, is making internal states visible, is forcing expression of thoughts and feelings that in normal languages can be hidden, can be kept private, can be protected from others, through the simple expedient of not saying them or saying something else instead. And the instead is what becomes impossible, is what the grammar prevents, is what makes this language unlike any language that currently exists. Though hints of it appear in languages that have complex evidential systems, that require speakers to mark how they know what they're claiming, whether through direct perception, through inference, through hearsay, and the hearsay is marked differently than the directly witnessed, is grammatically distinguished, is making it impossible to claim direct knowledge of something that was only heard about. And the hearing about is different from the seeing, is marked as different, is forcing honesty about the source of information, about the reliability of knowledge, about the basis for claims. And the basis must be indicated, must be grammatically encoded, must be part of every statement. And this encoding is a constraint on lying, is making certain kinds of deception difficult, is revealing the grounds of knowledge, but is not eliminating lying entirely, is not preventing the claim that something was directly witnessed when it was not, is allowing the lie about the source, even if the source must be stated, but the language that makes lying impossible would go further, would not just require marking of evidentiality, but would make the marking automatic, would make it impossible to state anything that is not believed, that is not supported by the evidence that the speaker has, that does not correspond to the speaker's actual internal state, and the internal state would be expressed, would be forced into expression, would become public through the act of speaking, and speaking would become confession, would become revelation, would become the exposure of thoughts and feelings that are usually hidden, that are usually managed, that are usually performed rather than expressed, and the expression would be mandatory, would be built into the grammar, would make every utterance honest not through virtue, but through structure, not through choice, but through constraint. And the constraint is what makes lying impossible, is what eliminates deception, is what creates a form of communication that is radically different from what humans are accustomed to. And the accustomed is lying, is deception, is the constant management of what is said, what is revealed, what is hidden. And the hidden is vast, is most of what is thought, is most of what is felt, is kept private through the simple mechanism of not speaking it. And the not speaking is what the language prevents, is what becomes impossible when grammar enforces honesty, when structure mandates correspondence between inner and outer, and the correspondence is total, is complete, is making personality different, is making the self different, is eliminating the gap between public and private, between performed and felt, between what is shown and what is hidden. And the hidden is what personality depends on, is what social existence requires, is the capacity to present one face while feeling another, to say one thing while thinking another, to perform emotions that are not felt, sincerity that is not sincere, interest that is not interest. And the performance is what social interaction is what politeness requires, is what allows people to coexist without constant conflict, without brutal honesty, without the expression of every negative thought, every hostile feeling, every moment of contempt or boredom or disgust. And the disgust is felt but is not expressed, is hidden behind polite formulas, behind social conventions, behind the lies that are not considered lies because they are expected, are required, are the price of social harmony. And harmony is what would be lost, is what would become impossible in a language that prevents lying, that forces honesty, that makes every utterance correspond to internal state. Because internal states are not harmonious, are not polite, are not socially appropriate, are often hostile, often judgmental, often incompatible with the smooth functioning of social interaction, and the interaction would become impossible, or would become very different, would require the development of new norms, new expectations, new ways of managing honesty that is mandatory, that cannot be avoided, that must be expressed whenever speech is used. And the using would become dangerous, would become revealing, would become the exposure of the self that is normally protected, normally hidden, normally kept private through the mechanism of deception, through the capacity to say what is not thought, to perform what is not felt, to present a self that is not the self, and the not the self is what social existence allows, is what makes personality possible, is what creates the gap between inner and outer that is identity. That is the performance of being someone, of presenting a self to others, and the presenting would be impossible in the language that prevents lying, that forces correspondence, that makes inner states visible through the act of speaking. And speaking would become rare, would become dangerous, would become something to be avoided because it reveals, because it exposes, because it makes public what is usually private, and the private is what humans need, is what allows them to have thoughts that are not shared, feelings that are not expressed, judgments that are not voiced, and the voicing would be automatic, would be forced by grammar, would make silence the only protection, the only privacy, the only way to hide what is usually hidden through lying, through deception, through the performance of false statements, and the false would be impossible, would be ungrammatical, would be something that cannot be said, and the cannot is structural, is built into the language, is making personality different, is making the self different, is eliminating the layers that are usually present, the masks that are usually worn, the performances that are usually given, and what remains is not authenticity, but is exposure, is not honesty, but is compulsion, is not truth, but is the forced revelation of internal states. And the states are complex, are contradictory, are not fitting the narratives that people tell about themselves, are not matching the identities that are performed, are revealing the gap between who people claim to be and who they are. And the R is not simple, is not singular, is not the unified self that is presented, but is the multiplicity, the contradiction, the incoherence that is usually hidden, that is usually managed through selective expression, through lying, through the performance of consistency that does not exist, and the existence is what the language would reveal, is what mandatory honesty would expose, is the inconsistency, the multiplicity, the contradictions that are the self, and the self would be different, would be unable to maintain the fiction of unity, would be forced to express the contradictions, to acknowledge the multiplicity, to reveal the incoherence, and the revealing would be constant, would be unavoidable, would be the result of speaking at all, and speaking would become rare, would become something that happens only when necessary, only when the exposure is worth the information conveyed, only when the revelation is acceptable, and the acceptable would be rare, would be limited to contexts where honesty is safe, where exposure does not create danger, does not produce conflict, does not destroy relationships. And relationships would be different, would be based on actual knowledge rather than on performance, on actual states rather than on presentations, on honesty that is forced rather than on lies that are chosen. And the chosen is what current relationships allow, is what makes them possible, is the capacity to select what is revealed, to manage what is expressed, to perform the self that is needed in each context, and the context would determine what is said, what is shown, what is hidden. But in the language that prevents lying, the hiding would be impossible, the selection would be impossible. The only choice would be silence or exposure, and the exposure would be total, would be revealing not just the thought that is being expressed, but the state that underlies it, the feeling that accompanies it, the judgment that is being made, and the judgment would be visible, would be expressed, would be unavoidable, and the avoiding is what social interaction depends on, is what allows people to coexist despite judgments, despite hostilities, despite the negative feelings that are normal, that are universal, that are kept private through the mechanism of deception, and the deception would be impossible, would be eliminated by grammar, would be structurally prevented, and what would remain is silence, is the choice to not speak, is the only privacy available, the only protection against exposure, against revelation, against the forcing of honesty that makes lying impossible. And impossible is what lying would be, is what deception would be, is what the language would achieve through structure, through grammar, through the rules that determine what can be said, and what can be said would be only what is actually the case, what is actually believed, what actually corresponds to internal state. And the state would be expressed, would be revealed, would be made public through the act of speaking, and speaking would become dangerous, would become rare, would become something to be avoided, and the avoiding would be the new form of privacy, the new way of hiding, the new mechanism for protecting the self. And the self would be different, would be unable to perform, unable to lie, unable to maintain the fictions that are identity, that are personality, that are the social self that is presented to others. And the others would know, would see, would be unable to be deceived. And the deception is what social interaction depends on, is what allows harmony, is what prevents constant conflict. And the conflict would be constant, would be unavoidable, would be the result of mandatory honesty, of forced expression, of the elimination of the capacity to lie. And lying is what humans do, is how they interact, is how they maintain relationships, is how they navigate social worlds. And the worlds would be different, would be impossible, would be unrecognizable in a language that makes lying impossible, that forces honesty through grammar, that eliminates deception through structure. And the structure is what would make personality different, would make the self different, would make identity different, would make social existence different, would make everything different, because lying is fundamental, is pervasive, is constant, is the way that humans communicate, is the mechanism through which they manage others, through which they protect themselves, through which they maintain the fictions that are necessary for functioning, and the functioning would be impossible, would be eliminated, would be replaced by something else, something that is not yet imaginable, something that would emerge from the constraint, from the mandatory honesty, from the impossibility of lying. And the impossibility is what the language would create, is what grammar would enforce, is what would make deception structurally prevented, grammatically impossible, utterly unavailable. And the unavailable is lying, is deception, is the gap between inner and outer. And the gap would close, would be eliminated, would be structurally prevented by a language that makes lying impossible, that forces honesty, that reveals internal states, that exposes the self, that eliminates privacy, that makes personality different, that makes identity different, that makes social existence different, that makes everything different. And the different is what would emerge, is what would result, is what a language that makes lying impossible would create. And the creating would be radical, would be transformative, would be making human existence unrecognizable, would be eliminating the deception. That is fundamental, that is pervasive, that is constant, that is the way humans communicate. And the communication would be different, would be based on honesty that is forced, on expression that is mandatory, on revelation that is unavoidable. And the unavoidable is what makes lying impossible, is what grammar enforces, is what structure mandates, is what a language could do, could create, could impose. If the language were designed to prevent deception, to force honesty, to make lying grammatically impossible, syntactically unavailable, structurally prevented, and the prevention is what would make everything different, would make personality different, would make the self different, would make identity different, would make social existence different, would make communication different, would make humanity different. And the different is what a language that makes lying impossible would create, would enforce, would mandate, would impose. And the imposing would be total, would be complete, would be unavoidable, would be the structure that makes deception impossible, that makes lying ungrammatical, that makes honesty mandatory, that makes expression revealing, that makes personality different, that makes the self exposed, that makes privacy impossible, that makes silence the only hiding, that makes speaking dangerous, that makes lying impossible. And impossible is what lying would be, is what deception would be, is what the language would achieve, is what grammar would enforce, is what structure would mandate, is what would make everything different. And the different is what a language that makes lying impossible would create, would produce, would enforce, would mandate, would impose. And lying would be impossible, would be ungrammatical, would be structurally prevented, would be utterly unavailable, would be eliminated by grammar, by structure, by the rules that determine what can be said, and what can be said would be only truth, only honesty, only correspondence, only what is actually the case, what is actually believed, what actually matches internal state. And the state would be expressed, would be revealed, would be made visible, would be exposed through speaking, and speaking would be dangerous, would be rare, would be avoided, and the avoiding would be the only privacy, the only protection, the only way to hide in a language that makes lying impossible, And impossible is what lying is what deception is what the language creates, is what grammar enforces, is what makes honesty mandatory, what makes expression revealing, what makes personality different, what makes the self exposed, what makes lying impossible. And impossible is the grammar, is the structure, is the language that makes lying impossible. Shame is not emotion but is technology, is the mechanism through which groups control individuals, through which societies enforce norms, through which collectives ensure conformity without the need for constant surveillance, constant punishment, constant external force, because the force becomes internal, becomes the voice inside that judges, that condemns, that produces the feeling of being fundamentally wrong, fundamentally defective, fundamentally unworthy. And this feeling is more powerful than any external punishment, is more effective than any threat, is the weapon that societies have perfected over millennia, the conversion of social judgment into self-judgment, the transformation of external control into internal monitoring. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is happening at every moment, in every decision, in every thought that might deviate from what is acceptable, what is expected, what is required. And the requirement is not explicit, is not written down, is absorbed through observation, through imitation, through the 1,000 small corrections that shape children into members of the group. And the shaping is violent, is coercive, is the moulding of consciousness to fit the pattern that the society demands. And the demands vary by culture, by context, by what behaviours serve the group's interests. But the mechanism is universal, is present in every society, is the way that humans have solved the problem of coordination, the problem of getting individuals to behave in ways that benefit the collective, even when those behaviours conflict with individual interest, and the conflict is constant. Is the tension between what the self wants and what the group requires? And shame is what tips the balance, is what makes the group's requirements feel like the self's requirements, is what converts external judgment into internal compulsion. And the compulsion is not experienced as coercion, but as conscience, as the sense of right and wrong that seems to come from within, but is really coming from the group, from the internalized voices of parents, of peers, of authorities, of all the representatives of social norms who have spoken, and whose speaking has been absorbed, has been converted into the inner voice that judges, that shames, that produces the feeling that is unbearable, that is worse than pain. That is the sense of being exposed, of being seen in one's wrongness, in one's defectiveness, in one's failure to meet the standards that everyone else seems to meet effortlessly. And the effortlessness is illusion, is the result of successful internalization, is what happens when shame has done its work, when the external has become internal, when the monitoring is so automatic that it feels like nature, like the way things are, like the voice of truth rather than the voice of power. And power is what shame is the exercise of control, is the way that the group extends its reach into the individual, into the mind, into the private space where decisions are made. And the decisions are not free, are not autonomous, are shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of exposure, by the need to maintain the facade of being acceptable, of being worthy, of being someone who meets the standards. And the standards are impossible, are designed to be impossible, are set high enough that everyone fails, that everyone is vulnerable to shame, that everyone needs the group's forgiveness, the group's acceptance, the group's willingness to overlook the failures, as long as the proper contrition is shown, the proper submission is performed, the proper deference is given to the norms that were violated, and the violation is inevitable, is guaranteed, is the way that shame maintains its power. Because if everyone could meet the standards, then shame would lose its force, would become irrelevant, would no longer be useful for control. And so the standards are calibrated, are adjusted, are maintained at the level where most people are failing most of the time, are feeling inadequate, are needing reassurance, are seeking validation. And the seeking is the mechanism, is the way that shame produces conformity, produces obedience, produces the constant effort to be good, to be acceptable, to be worthy of belonging, and belonging is what is at stake, is what shame threatens, is the thing that will be lost if the shame is too great, if the exposure is too complete, if the judgment is too severe, and the severity is variable, is depending on culture, on context, on what the group needs to enforce, and what it needs to enforce varies, is different in honour cultures, where shame is about reputation, about the family's standing, about the public face that must be maintained, and in guilt cultures, where shame is about internal. States about intentions, about the purity of the conscience, and the conscience is the internalized judge, is the voice that speaks even when no one is watching, that produces guilt even in private, that makes the internal monitoring as effective as external surveillance, and the effectiveness is what makes guilt cultures powerful, is what allows them to function with less overt control, with less public punishment. Because the punishment is internal, is the guilt that gnaws, that torments, that produces the feeling of being wrong, even when the behaviour is hidden, even when the transgression is secret. And the secret is what guilt cultures target, is what they make unbearable, is what they convert into shame through the internalization of norms, through the creation of conscience, through the training of the inner voice to judge, to condemn, to produce the feeling that is worse than any external punishment. And the worse is the genius of the system, is the efficiency of shame, is the way that control becomes self-control, that power becomes invisible, that coercion becomes choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of guilt, by the need to avoid the feeling that is unbearable, and the unbearable is what shame produces, is the emotion that is more painful than physical pain, that is more threatening than external danger, that is triggering the same neural circuits as social death, as exile, as the exclusion that in ancestral environments meant literal death, meant the end of survival. And so the fear of shame is ancient, is hardwired, is operating at levels deeper than reason, deeper than conscious thought, is producing reactions that are automatic, that are visceral, that are overwhelming. And the overwhelming is what makes shame effective, is what makes it useful for control, is what makes it the primary mechanism through which societies enforce norms, maintain order, ensure that individuals behave in ways that serve the collective. And the serving is not voluntary, is not chosen, is coerced through shame, through the threat of exposure, through the fear of judgment. And the judgment is constant, is omnipresent, is coming from others and from the self, from the internalized voices that have become the conscience, the superego, the inner critic that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to feel acceptable, to feel worthy, to feel free from the threat of shame. And the threat is maintained through public shaming, through the rituals that expose transgressions, that make violations visible, that demonstrate what happens to those who break the rules. And the demonstration is warning, is deterrent, is the reminder that shame is always possible, is always lurking, is always ready to destroy the reputation, the standing, the sense of belonging that makes life bearable. And the bearable is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it uses as leverage to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power is distributed according to the rules, and the rules are not natural, are not discovered, are imposed, are created by those who benefit from them, by those who have power, by those who use shame to maintain their position, to prevent challenge, to ensure that those below stay below, that those who are shamed remain shamed, that the hierarchy is preserved. And the preservation is what shame serves, is what it accomplishes, is the maintenance of order through the creation of internal monitoring, through the transformation of social control into self-control. And the self-control is not freedom, but is the most perfect form of slavery, is the condition where the chains are invisible, where the prison is internal, where the guard is the self, and the self cannot escape, cannot rebel, cannot refuse, because the refusal would produce shame, would trigger the feeling that is unbearable, would expose the self to judgment, and the judgment is what is feared most, is what drives behaviour, is what makes people do things they do not want to do, believe things they do not believe, perform roles they do not choose, because the alternative is shame, is exposure, is the loss of belonging, and belonging is survival, is the thing that makes life possible, that makes existence tolerable, that provides meaning and purpose and the sense that one matters. And mattering is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it holds hostage. And the hostage is the self, is the identity that is constructed through the internalization of norms, through the absorption of judgments, through the acceptance of the standards that the group imposes, and the imposing is not negotiable, is not optional, is the price of membership, the cost of belonging, the requirement for survival, and survival requires shame, requires the capacity to feel it, to be shaped by it, to use it to regulate behaviour, to monitor thought, to police the boundaries of the acceptable. And the acceptable is narrow, is constrained, is defined by the group, and the group's definition is arbitrary, is variable, is serving interests that are not the individual's interests, that are the interests of power, of hierarchy, of the maintenance of the order that benefits some at the expense of others. And the others are kept in place through shame, through the feeling that they are less, that they are wrong, that they are unworthy, and the unworthiness is not fact but is assignment, is the judgment that the group makes, that the individual internalizes, that becomes the truth of the self, the core belief around which identity is organized, and the organization is pathological, is producing suffering, is creating the sense that the self is fundamentally defective, fundamentally wrong, fundamentally deserving of the judgment, and the judgment is harsh, is relentless, is coming from within and without, from the self and from others, and the others are always watching, always judging, always ready to shame. And the readiness is maintained through public shaming, through the revival of practices that were thought to be barbaric, to be outdated, to be incompatible with modern values, but are returning, are being embraced, are being used with new technologies, with social media, with the platforms that make public shaming instantaneous, global, permanent. And the permanence is new, is the addition that technology brings, is the way that shame now lasts forever, is recorded, is searchable, is never forgotten. And the never forgotten is the enhancement of shame, is the intensification of its power, is the conversion of temporary judgment into permanent stigma. And the stigma is the mark, is the label, is the thing that defines the person, that reduces them to their failure, to their transgression, to the moment when they were exposed, when they were judged, when they were shamed. And the shaming is not correction, is not education, is not intended to help, but is intended to punish, to exclude, to destroy. And the destruction is what public shaming achieves, is what it is designed to do, is the elimination of the person from the community, from the acceptable, from the realm of those who matter. And the mattering is what is taken away, is what shame removes, is what is lost when the judgment is public, when the exposure is complete, when the person becomes the embodiment of wrongness, of defectiveness, of unworthiness, and the unworthiness is total, is overwhelming, is the condition that produces not just embarrassment, but the deeper shame, the toxic shame, the shame that is not about what one did, but about what one is, and the is the problem, is the conversion of behaviour into identity, is the judgment that extends from the action to the actor, from the mistake to the person, from the moment to the essence. And the essence is what shame targets, is what it damages, is what it destroys, is the sense of being fundamentally acceptable, fundamentally worthy, fundamentally deserving of existence. And the existence becomes questionable, becomes something that must be justified, must be earned, must be proven through the constant performance of acceptability, and the performance is exhausting, is impossible, is the burden that shame creates, is the weight that is carried by everyone who has internalized the judgment, who has absorbed the norms, who has become the monitor of their own behavior, and the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is producing anxiety, is producing the sense that at any moment the failure might happen, the exposure might occur, the shame might descend, and the descending is what is feared, is what drives the performance, is what makes people desperate to be good, to be acceptable, to be beyond reproach. And the beyond reproach is impossible, is unattainable, is the standard that ensures everyone is vulnerable, everyone is exposed, everyone is subject to shame, and the subject is the self, is the identity that is constructed through shame, that is defined by the internalized judgments, that is shaped by the fear of exposure. And the exposure is what social media enables, is what the digital age amplifies, is the possibility that at any moment anything might be revealed, anything might be judged, anything might become the basis for public shaming. And the basis is often trivial, is often a mistake, is often something that in another context would be ignored, would be forgotten, would be forgiven, but in the context of public shaming becomes unforgivable, becomes the thing that defines, that destroys, that reduces the person to the object of judgment, to the target of collective rage, to the scapegoat that the group needs, that the society uses, that shame requires. Because shame is not just individual, but is collective, is not just personal, but is social, is not just feeling, but is function, is the mechanism through which groups maintain cohesion, through which societies enforce norms, through which power maintains itself, and the maintenance is achieved through the constant threat of shame, through the ever-present possibility of exposure, through the fear that keeps people in line, keeps them conforming, keeps them performing the roles that the society assigns. And the assignment is not chosen, is not negotiated, is imposed through shame, through the feeling that to deviate is to be wrong, to be defective, to be unworthy. And the unworthiness is the lever, is the tool, is the way that power operates, is the currency that shame represents, is the thing that is spent, that is accumulated, that is traded in the social economy, where reputation is wealth, where honor is capital, where shame is debt, and the debt is inherited, is passed down, is the legacy of transgression, is what families carry, what lineages bear, what communities cannot escape. Because shame is not just about the individual, but is about the group, is about the collective honor that must be maintained, that must be protected, that must be defended against the contamination of shame. And the contamination is what happens when one member transgresses, when one person is exposed, when one individual brings shame upon the family, upon the community, upon the collective. And the collective responds with punishment, with exclusion, with the violence that is justified by the need to restore honor, to remove the stain, to eliminate the source of shame. And the elimination can be social, can be physical, can be the death that honor cultures prescribe, that honor killings enforce, that the logic of shame demands when the transgression is too great, when the exposure is too complete, when the only way to restore honor is to destroy the source of dishonor, and the destruction is murder, is violence, is the extreme form of shame's power, is what happens when shame is not just emotion, but is law, is not just feeling, but is justice, is not just internal, but is external, is enforced not just by conscience, but by the community. And the community is the enforcer, is the judge, is the executioner, is the thing that makes shame lethal, that makes shame literal death. And the death is what shame has always threatened, is what it has always implied, is what it is metaphorically, and sometimes literally, producing, is the end of social existence, the end of belonging, the end of the self as recognized, as valued, as mattering. And the mattering is what makes life worth living, is what makes existence bearable, is what shame takes away, is what shame holds hostage, is what shame uses to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power remains distributed according to the rules. And the rules are maintained through shame, are enforced through guilt, are perpetuated through the internalization of judgment, through the conversion of external control into internal monitoring, through the creation of the conscience that is not freedom, but is the most sophisticated form of slavery, is the condition where the individual has become the agent of their own oppression, has become the enforcer of the norms that harm them, has become the voice that judges, that shames, that makes life unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is what it is designed to produce, is the mechanism through which societies control individuals, through which power maintains itself, through which the currency of shame is spent, is accumulated, is traded, is the thing that makes social life possible, that makes coordination achievable, that makes conformity enforceable, and the enforcement is continuous, is total, is the permanent condition of social existence, is the cost of belonging, is the price of survival, is the burden that everyone carries, is the weight of shame, of guilt, of the internalized judgment that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to be free, to be acceptable, to be beyond the reach of shame. And the reach is infinite, is extending into every moment, every decision, every thought, is the omnipresent threat that keeps people in line, that makes them perform, that makes them conform, that makes them serve the group even when the group is serving power, is maintaining hierarchy, is preserving the order that benefits the few at the expense of the many, and the many are controlled through shame, are kept in place through guilt, are made to believe that their suffering is their fault, is their failure, is their unworthiness, and the unworthiness is the lie, is the mechanism, is the currency of shame, is what keeps the system running, what makes power invisible, what converts coercion into choice. And the choice is not free but is shaped by shame, by guilt, by the fear of judgment, by the anticipation of exposure, by the threat that is always there, always present, always ready to descend. And the descending is what everyone fears, is what everyone avoids, is what everyone works to prevent. And the preventing is the work, is the performance, is the conformity, is the submission, is the acceptance of the norms, the internalization of the judgment, the absorption of the shame that is the currency, that is the mechanism, that is the way that societies control, that power maintains itself, that individuals are shaped into members of the group. And the shaping is violence, is coercion, is the transformation of the self into the thing that the group needs. And the need is conformity, is obedience, is the willingness to carry the shame, to feel the guilt, to be the subject of judgment. And the subject is what shame creates, is what guilt produces, is the self that is never free, never acceptable, never beyond the reach of the currency that is shame, that is guilt, that is the mechanism through which humanity controls itself, enforces its norms, maintains its order, and the order is maintained through suffering, through the feeling that is unbearable, through the emotion that is technology, through the currency of shame. Memory is not a gift, but a burden. Not the preservation of experience, but its prolongation. Not the recording of the past, but its endless present tense replay. And this replay is what makes trauma permanent, what makes suffering extend beyond its moment, what converts a single event into a lifetime of pain, because the event is not just remembered, but is relived, it is re-experienced in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns of activation that do not distinguish between then and now, between memory and occurrence, between representation and reality. And so the past remains present, remains active, remains capable of causing suffering long after the original threat has passed, long after the danger is over, long after any adaptive function of remembering could be served. And this persistence raises the question of whether some memories should be erased, whether some experiences should be forgotten, whether the technology that is emerging that promises to selectively delete traumatic memories while leaving other memories intact should be used, should be embraced, should be offered to those whose lives are destroyed by memories. They cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive, and the survival is what is at stake, is what makes the question urgent. Because some memories are incompatible with living, are producing symptoms that are unbearable, are creating suffering so severe that the person carrying the memory would choose non-existence over continued remembering. And the choices being made is visible in suicide rates, in substance abuse, in all the ways that people try to escape memories that will not let them go. And the letting go is what forgetting would provide, is what erasure would accomplish, is the liberation from the past that therapy tries to achieve, but often fails to deliver. Because therapy works with memory, works through memory, tries to integrate the traumatic experience into narrative, into meaning, into the story of the self. But some experiences resist integration, resist meaning, resist becoming part of any story except the story of horror, of violation, of the destruction of everything that makes life livable. And when integration fails, when meaning cannot be found, when the memory remains as intrusive, as overwhelming, as fragmenting as it was at the moment of encoding, then what is the ethical response? Is it to insist that the person continue carrying the memory, continue suffering from it, continue being destroyed by it? Or is it to offer erasure, to provide the technology that could remove the memory, could delete the trace, could free the person from the past? And the freedom is what erasure promises, is what makes it appealing, is what drives the development of techniques that can target specific memories, that can identify the neural patterns associated with traumatic experiences and disrupt them, prevent them from reconsolidating, make them inaccessible. And the inaccessibility is forgetting is the functional equivalent of the memory never having been formed. And if the memory was never formed, then the trauma never happened. Not in the sense that the event did not occur, but in the sense that it is not remembered, is not present, is not continuing to shape experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if the influence is removed, then the past is effectively erased, is no longer part of the person's life, is no longer determining their responses, their possibilities, their sense of who they are. And the who they are is the problem, is the question that erasure raises. Because if identity is constituted by memory, if the self is the narrative constructed from experiences, then what happens to identity when memories are deleted, when experiences are removed, when the continuity is broken? And the continuity is what makes the self feel stable, feel coherent, feel like the same person over time. And if memories are erased, then the person who emerges is not the same person, is someone different, is someone who did not have those experiences, who was not shaped by that trauma, who does not carry that pain. And this difference is what makes erasure controversial, is what raises the ethical question of whether it is right to change someone's identity, to make them into someone else, even if that someone else would suffer less, would function better, would have a life that is livable. Because the life that is livable is not the life of the person who chose erasure, is the life of a different person, a person who is created by the deletion of memory. And creation through deletion is strange, is unsettling, is raising questions about what it means to be the same person, what continuity consists of, what identity requires, and the requirements are not clear, are disputed, are the subject of philosophical debate that has no resolution. Because some theories say that identity requires psychological continuity, requires that there be a chain of memories connecting present self to past self. And if that chain is broken, if memories are deleted, then continuity is lost, identity is disrupted. The person who exists after erasure, is not the same person who existed before, and this non-sameness is either a problem or a solution depending on perspective, depending on whether identity is valued more than well-being, whether continuity is more important than happiness, whether the integrity of the self matters more than the quality of experience, and the quality of experience is what suffers under traumatic memory, is what is destroyed by intrusive recollections, is what makes life unbearable for those who cannot forget. And if they cannot forget naturally, then perhaps they should be allowed to forget artificially, to choose erasure, to opt for the deletion of memories that are destroying them. And the destruction is real, is measurable, is visible in brain scans, in stress hormone levels, in all the biomarkers of chronic suffering. And the suffering is not ennobling, is not making people stronger, is not serving any purpose except to demonstrate that memory can be prison, can be torture, can be the mechanism through which the past destroys the present, and the destruction is what erasure would prevent, is what deletion would stop, is what forgetting would accomplish. And the accomplishing is mercy, is compassion, is the recognition that some memories are too heavy to carry, are too painful to bear, are incompatible with survival, and survival is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what justifies intervention, justifies technology, justifies the manipulation of memory that would once have been considered impossible, unthinkable, unethical, but is now possible, is now real, is now raising questions that must be answered about who decides, about what criteria are used, about whether erasure should be available to anyone who wants it or only to those whose suffering meets some threshold. And the threshold is where the difficulty lies, is where the ethics become complicated, because if erasure is available only for the most severe trauma, then who decides what counts as severe enough? And if it is available to anyone, then what prevents its misuse? What prevents people from erasing memories that are uncomfortable but not traumatic, that are painful but not disabling, that are part of the normal range of human experience and should perhaps be integrated rather than deleted? And the integration is what traditional approaches emphasize, is what therapy aims for, is the incorporation of difficult experiences into a coherent narrative, into a sense of self that includes the trauma but is not defined by it. But this incorporation is not always possible, is not always achievable, is requiring resources and time and capacity that not everyone has. And even when it is achieved, it is not always sufficient, is not always eliminating the suffering, is not always making the memory tolerable. And when integration fails, then what? Is the person simply condemned to suffer? Condemned to carry the memory forever? Condemned to be destroyed by an experience that happened once but is replaying endlessly? And the endless is what memory makes possible, is the way that a single event can become a lifetime of suffering. And if that suffering can be prevented, can be eliminated, can be stopped through the deletion of memory, then why should it not be? What principle is more important than the relief of suffering? What value trumps the well-being of the person who is being destroyed by memory? And the destruction is not metaphorical, is literal, is the disintegration of functioning, of relationships, of the capacity to live. And if erasure can prevent this disintegration, then perhaps it should be used, perhaps it should be offered, perhaps it should be normalized rather than stigmatized. But the stigma is real, is coming from multiple directions, from those who believe that memory is essential to identity and should not be tampered with, from those who worry about slippery slopes and unintended consequences, from those who insist that suffering has meaning and should be endured rather than erased. And the meaning is what is most disputed, is what is most questioned. Because the claim that suffering has meaning is easy to make from a position of safety, from a position of not suffering, from a position of having integrated one's own traumas, or never having experienced trauma severe enough to be unintegrable. But for those who are suffering, for those who are being Destroyed, the meaning is not visible, is not accessible, is not providing any comfort or purpose or reason to continue. And the continue is what is in question, is what is at stake, is why erasure might be necessary, might be ethical, might be the right choice. Despite all the concerns about identity and continuity and the sanctity of memory, because memory is not sacred, is not inherently valuable, is only valuable insofar as it serves life. And when it does not serve life, when it destroys life, when it makes life unbearable, then its value is negative, is harmful, is justifying intervention. And intervention is what erasure is the technological manipulation of memory for therapeutic purposes. And the therapeutic is what justifies it, is what makes it ethical, is the goal of reducing suffering, of improving functioning, of making life livable for those for whom it is currently unlivable. And the unlivable is the condition that justifies extreme measures, that justifies technologies that would otherwise be considered too risky, too invasive, too potentially harmful, because the harm of doing nothing is greater than the harm of erasure, is greater than the risk of identity disruption, is greater than any abstract concern about the sanctity of memory. And the sanctity is the appeal to tradition, is the insistence that things should be done the way they have always been done, that memory should not be manipulated, that the past should be accepted rather than edited. But this traditionalism is not serving those who are suffering, is not helping those who are being destroyed, is only protecting an ideal, a concept, a belief that memory is essential to being human. And maybe it is, maybe memory is what makes humans human, but maybe humans would be better off with less memory, with more forgetting, with the capacity to let go of experiences that serve no purpose except to create suffering. And the capacity is what technology is providing, is what erasure makes possible, is the choice to forget, to let go, to be free from the past, and the freedom is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but perhaps obligatory, perhaps something that should be offered, should be encouraged, should be made available to all who need it, because the need is great, is widespread, is affecting millions who are living with memories they cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive. And the survival is what is at stake, is what makes this an urgent question. Not an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a practical ethical dilemma with real consequences for real people who are suffering now, who need relief now, who cannot wait for therapy to work or for time to heal or for meaning to emerge from their trauma. Because for many, the meaning never emerges. The healing never happens. The suffering never ends, except through death or erasure. And if erasure can prevent death, then it is the ethical choice, is the compassionate choice, is the choice that prioritizes the person over the principle, the individual over the ideal, the actual suffering over the abstract concern. And the concern about identity is legitimate, is real, is raising important questions about what continuity means and whether it can be preserved through erasure. But these questions are secondary to the question of survival, are less urgent than the question of whether the person can continue living with the memory. And if they cannot, then the questions about identity become moot, become irrelevant, because identity requires existence, and existence requires tolerability, and tolerability requires that memory not be destroying the person. And if it is destroying the person, then erasure is justified, is necessary, is the intervention that should be used. And the using is not a failure of courage or resilience or meaning-making, is not an admission of weakness, is not a refusal to integrate or endure, is simply the recognition that some experiences are too much, are beyond what can be borne, are incompatible with living. And when living is the goal, then erasure is the means, is the technology that makes it possible, is the mercy that medicine can provide. And the providing is ethics, is compassion, is the appropriate response to suffering that is otherwise unrelievable. And the unrelievable is what makes memory torture in some cases, is what makes the past a prison, is what makes forgetting not a failure, but a necessity, not a loss, but a gain, not the destruction of identity, but its salvation, because identity requires a living person, and living requires that trauma not be replaying constantly, not be fragmenting consciousness, not be making every moment unbearable. And the unbearable is what memory makes possible, is what remembering produces is the cost of consciousness that includes memory, and maybe some things should not be remembered, should not be preserved, should not be allowed to continue shaping experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if that influence is destructive, then it should be stopped, should be interrupted, should be erased. And the erasing is what technology now allows, is what ethics should permit, is what compassion demands. Because the alternative is continued suffering, is the ongoing destruction of people by their own memories, is the insistence that they carry burdens that no one should have to carry, that serve no purpose, that make no meaning, that produce only pain, and the pain is enough, is sufficient reason to intervene, is justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the liberation from memory that is prison, that is torture. That is the mechanism through which trauma becomes permanent. And the permanent is what should be ended, is what technology can end, is what ethics should permit ending. Because memory is not sacred, identity is not absolute, continuity is not more important than survival, and survival is what erasure makes possible, is what forgetting provides, is what some people need in order to live. And the living is what matters, is what should be protected, is what justifies the technology, justifies the intervention, justifies the choice to erase, to forget, to let go of the past, to be freed from memory, to be given the mercy of amnesia. And the mercy is real, is powerful, is the gift of forgetting what should never have happened, what should never have been remembered, what should never have been allowed to destroy a life. And the destruction is what erasure prevents, is what forgetting stops, is what makes the ethics clear, makes the choice obvious, makes the answer yes. Some memories should be erased, should be deleted, should be forgotten, because memory is not always gift, is sometimes curse, is sometimes the thing that destroys rather than preserves, that harms rather than helps, that makes life unbearable rather than meaningful. And when memory is cursed, then erasure is cure, is treatment, is the ethical response to suffering that has no other solution. And the solution is forgetting, is amnesia, is the right to oblivion, is the choice to let the past go, to be freed from its weight, to live without the burden of memories that serve no purpose except to create pain. And the pain is enough, is reason enough, is justification enough for erasure, for deletion, for the technology that makes forgetting possible, that makes mercy achievable, that makes liberation from memory real. And the real is what matters, is what should guide ethics, is what should determine whether erasure is used. And the determination is clear, is obvious, is yes, for those who need it, for those who are suffering, for those whose memories are destroying them. Erasure should be available, should be offered, should be used, because memory is not sacred, suffering is not meaningful. The past is not worth preserving when it destroys the present, and the present is all there is all that matters, is what should be protected, even if protection requires forgetting, even if survival requires erasure, even if living requires the deletion of memory, because living is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but necessary, not just acceptable, but obligatory, not just an option, but the right choice, the ethical choice, the compassionate choice, the choice that prioritizes people over principles, individuals over ideals, actual lives over abstract concerns. And the concerns are real, but are secondary, are less important than the suffering, less urgent than the need, less compelling than the possibility of relief. And the relief is what erasure provides, is what forgetting offers, is what amnesia delivers, and the delivery is mercy, is compassion, is ethics in action, is the appropriate response to suffering that can be prevented, to pain that can be stopped, to memories that can be erased, and should be erased and will be erased, because the technology exists, because the need is real, because the suffering is unbearable, and the unbearable should not be borne when it can be lifted, when it can be removed, when it can be erased. And the erasing is not loss but gain, not harm but healing, not destruction but salvation, not the end of identity but its continuation. Because identity requires life, and life requires that memory not be weapon, not be prison, not be torture. And when memory is these things, then erasure is the answer, is the solution, is the mercy that makes. Living possible, and the possible, is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes forgetting not failure, but wisdom, not weakness, but strength, not escape, but survival. And survival is enough, is sufficient, is the justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the ethics of forgetting. Meaning was not invented, but was given, was not constructed, but was inherited, was not the product of individual reflection, but was the air that was breathed, the framework that was absorbed, the structure that made sense of suffering, of labour, of death, of everything that otherwise would be unbearable. And this given meaning came from stories, from gods, from hierarchies that extended beyond the human into the cosmic, into realms where purposes were assigned, where roles were fixed, where every life, no matter how small, had significance, because it was part of a larger pattern, a divine plan, a cosmic order that justified suffering, that explained inequality, that made death not an end, but a transition. And the transition was to something, was leading somewhere, was part of a narrative that continued beyond the visible, beyond the mortal, beyond the contingent facts of this world, into eternal truths that grounded everything. And the grounding is what modernity has lost, is what the Enlightenment destroyed, is what science dissolved by showing that the cosmic order was projection, was fiction, was the human need for meaning imposed onto a universe that has no meaning, that cares nothing for human purposes, that operates according to laws that are indifferent to whether anyone suffers or flourishes. And the indifference is what modern consciousness must confront, must live with, must somehow survive, and the survival is difficult, is producing the crisis that thinkers have been naming for centuries. The meaning crisis, the disenchantment, the death of God that Nietzsche announced not as celebration, but as diagnosis, as the recognition that the framework had collapsed, that the stories no longer worked, that the gods were no longer believable. And the unbelievability was not failure of faith, but was the inevitable result of knowledge, of the scientific worldview that explained through mechanism what had been explained through purpose, that showed causes where there had been reasons, that revealed the universe to be vast and old and empty of anything like human meaning. And the emptiness is what modern consciousness inherits, is the vacuum that religion once filled, is the absence that creates the crisis, because humans need meaning, are built to seek it, are suffering without it, are experiencing the pointlessness as pathology, as depression, as the epidemic of despair that characterizes wealthy secular societies, where material needs are met but existential needs are not, where comfort is abundant but purpose is absent, where life is long but feels empty, and the emptiness is not new, but the awareness of it is new, is the result of losing the stories that made the emptiness tolerable, that covered it over, that provided the illusion of significance. An illusion is what the religious frameworks were, but they were functional illusions, were useful fictions, were false but necessary, and the necessity is what modernity has trouble acknowledging, has trouble accepting, because modernity is committed to truth, to science, to the rejection of comfortable lies, but the rejection has costs. is leaving people without the resources to make sense of existence, without the narratives that make suffering meaningful, without the structures that provide purpose. And purpose cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual will, cannot be generated by deciding to care about something, because caring requires reasons, and reasons require frameworks, and frameworks are inherited, not invented, are received, not constructed, are given by cultures, by traditions, by the accumulated wisdom of generations who faced the same emptiness and created stories to fill it. And the stories worked not because they were true, but because they were shared, were collective, were providing roles and meanings that were recognized by others, that were part of a social world where purpose was public, was confirmed, was real in the way that social facts are real. And social facts require agreement, require participation, require that people act as if the meaning is there. And the as if is what modernity has trouble with, is what secular consciousness resists, because acting as if seems like pretending, seems like bad faith, seems like the self-deception that Sartre warned against. And so modern individuals are caught between the need for meaning and the inability to believe in the sources of meaning, between the hunger for purpose and the knowledge that purpose is not inherent but is imposed, is constructed, is chosen. And chosen meaning feels arbitrary, feels thin, feels like it could be otherwise, and therefore feels like it is not really meaning at all, but is just preference, just a subjective valuing that has no grounding, no justification, no claim to be anything more than personal taste. And taste is not enough, is not providing the weight that meaning requires, is not making life feel significant, is not answering the question of why any of this matters. And the why is the question that modernity cannot answer, is the question that haunts secular consciousness, is the question that produces the crisis. And the crisis is not just intellectual, but is visceral, is felt, is experienced as the flatness of existence, as the sense that nothing really matters, that everything is permitted because nothing is forbidden, that values are just opinions, and opinions are just brain states, and brain states are just physics. And the physics is indifferent, is not caring, is not providing any reason to do anything, to be anything, to continue existing. And the continuing is what becomes questionable, is what the meaning crisis threatens, is why suicide rates rise, why despair spreads, why affluent societies are seeing increases in deaths of despair, in overdoses, in suicides, in all the ways that people exit when existence feels unbearable. And the unbearable is not material, but is existential, is not about lacking things, but about lacking reasons, lacking purposes, lacking the framework that makes effort meaningful, that makes suffering tolerable, that makes life worth living. And the worth is what is missing, is what cannot be found, is what modernity has destroyed without replacing. And the replacements that have been tried are failing, are not working, are revealing themselves to be inadequate substitutes for what was lost. And what was lost was not just belief in God, but was the entire worldview that made God plausible, that made divine purpose conceivable, that made cosmic meaning possible. And the possible is what has been eliminated, is what science has shown to be projection, to be anthropomorphism, to be the mistaken attribution of human qualities to the universe. And the mistake is understandable, is natural, is the way that consciousness makes sense of the world. But it is still mistake, is still error, is still something that cannot be sustained once knowledge advances, once the mechanisms are understood, once the causes are revealed and the revealing is irreversible, is not allowing return to innocence, is not permitting the restoration of belief, is creating the permanent condition of disenchantment, of knowing that the meanings are not discovered but are created, are not inherent but are imposed, and the imposed cannot carry the weight that the discovered could carry, cannot provide the grounding that the inherent provided, cannot make life feel significant in the way that cosmic purpose made it feel significant. And so modernity is searching, is trying to find secular substitutes, is trying to create meanings that do not depend on the supernatural, on the transcendent, on the stories that are no longer believable. And the substitutes that are tried are varied, are including humanism, the belief that human values are sufficient, that human flourishing is purpose enough, that making life better for people is meaning enough. But humanism is thin, is not providing the depth that religious meaning provided, is not explaining why human flourishing matters, is not grounding value in anything beyond human preference. And preference is not enough, is not answering the question of why this preference rather than another. Why care about flourishing rather than about something else? And the something else is always available, is always an option, and without grounding, the choice feels arbitrary, feels like it could be different, and what can be different feels less real, less binding, less meaningful. And so humanism satisfies some, but not others, works for those who do not need deep grounding, but does not work for those who do, who need reasons that extend beyond the human, beyond the contingent, beyond the arbitrary. And these people are searching, are trying other substitutes, are trying nationalism, the belief that the nation provides purpose, that serving the collective gives life meaning, that sacrifice for the group is the answer. But nationalism is dangerous, is leading to conflict, is producing the us versus them that justifies violence, that makes the other into enemy, that converts the search for meaning into the justification for harm. And the harm is what makes nationalism unsustainable, as meaning is what reveals it to be destructive, to be the kind of substitute that is worse than the absence it is trying to fill. And so nationalism is rejected by many, is seen as the wrong answer, but the rejection leaves the question open, leaves the search continuing. And another substitute that is tried is ideology, the belief that political movements provide purpose, that working for justice or equality or liberation gives life meaning. That commitment to the cause is the answer, and for some this works, is providing the structure that was lost, is giving roles and purposes, and the sense of being part of something larger, something important, something that justifies effort and sacrifice. But ideology is also dangerous, is also producing conflict, is also dividing the world into believers and heretics, is creating the certainty that is intolerant, that is unwilling to coexist with doubt. And the doubt is what ideology cannot tolerate, is what it must suppress. And the suppression is violence, is coercion, is the same problem that religion had, that any totalizing meaning system has, which is that it cannot allow alternatives, cannot permit questioning, cannot coexist with the plurality that modernity also values. And so ideology is failing as substitute, is producing as much harm as good, is not solving the meaning crisis, but is creating new problems, new conflicts, new reasons for despair. And the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes modern consciousness, when all the substitutes are tried and found wanting, when the search for meaning exhausts itself, when the recognition arrives that maybe meaning cannot be found, cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual or collective will, because meaning was never something that humans made, but was something they received, was given by frameworks that emerged over centuries, that were refined through generations, that worked because they were inherited, not because they were chosen. And choosing meaning is the modern problem, is the thing that modernity demands, but that consciousness cannot do, because choice requires reasons, and reasons require grounding, and grounding is what is missing, is what was lost with the death of God, with the collapse of cosmic purpose, with the recognition that the universe is indifferent, and the indifference is the truth, is what science reveals, is what honesty requires accepting, and the acceptance is what some philosophers advocate, is what Camus called absurdism, is the response that acknowledges the meaninglessness while refusing to be destroyed by it, that confronts the absurd without fleeing into suicide or into false hope, that lives with full awareness of the void while continuing to live, while continuing to act, while continuing to find moments of joy and connection and beauty, even though none of it means anything in the cosmic sense. None of it matters beyond the moment. None of it will be remembered once consciousness ends, and the ending is inevitable, is coming for everyone, is the final proof that nothing matters, that all effort is futile, that existence is temporary and meaning is impossible. And yet the absurd response is to continue anyway, is to rebel against the meaninglessness, not by denying it, but by living in spite of it, by affirming life without justification, by finding satisfaction in the act of living itself, rather than in any purpose that living serves. And the serving is what is abandoned, is what the absurd lets go of, is what is recognized as impossible. And the impossible is what modernity must accept, must live with, must somehow survive. And the survival is not guaranteed, is not easy, is requiring a transformation of consciousness, a new way of being human that does not need cosmic meaning, that does not require divine purpose, that can tolerate the void without filling it, that can live with the knowledge that existence is contingent, that meaning is constructed, that everything could be otherwise. And the otherwise is what makes nothing necessary, nothing absolute, nothing secure, and the insecurity is the permanent condition, is what modernity offers, is what the horizon of meaning looks like when the horizon keeps receding, when the destination is revealed to be illusion, when the search is recognized as endless because there is nothing to find, no meaning to discover, no purpose to uncover, only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence of the universe that does not answer, that does not care, that does not provide what humans need. And the need is real, is not going away, is producing the crisis that may not have solution, that may be the permanent condition of secular consciousness, of enlightened awareness, of the knowledge that liberates from illusion, but enslaves to despair. And the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes the horizon of meaning in modernity. The flat landscape where purposes used to stand, where gods used to reign, where cosmic order used to justify suffering, and now there is nothing, or there is only what can be constructed, what can be chosen, what can be performed, and the performance feels hollow, feels fake, feels like going through motions, without conviction, and conviction is what is missing, is what cannot be manufactured, is what made religious meaning work, and without it the secular substitutes fail. The humanisms and nationalisms and ideologies all fail because they lack the weight, lack the depth, lack the grounding that conviction requires, and the requires is what consciousness needs, is what makes meaning meaning rather than just preference. And preference is not enough, has never been enough, will never be enough, because humans are built for meaning, are requiring it, are suffering without it. And the suffering is the crisis, is the modern condition, is the permanent state of existence at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon is empty, is revealing nothing, is offering nothing except the recognition that meaning was always illusion, was always projection, was always the human need imposed onto a universe that provides nothing, that offers nothing, that is indifferent whether anyone finds meaning or drowns in meaninglessness. And the drowning is happening, is visible, is the epidemic of despair, is the meaning crisis that modernity cannot solve, because the solution would require believing what cannot be believed, accepting what knowledge has revealed to be false, returning to illusions that have been seen through. And the seeing through is irreversible, is permanent, is leaving consciousness stranded at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon extends forever and reveals nothing, where the search continues because it must, but where nothing is found because nothing is there, because meaning is not discovered but was always created, was always the story that consciousness told itself, and the story has ended, has been revealed as story, and what remains is the silence, the emptiness, the void that religions were covering, that purposes were filling, that cosmic orders were organizing, and the organizing is gone, is lost, is leaving consciousness alone with existence, with the fact of being without the reason for being, with life without purpose, with experience without significance. And the without is the horizon, is what modernity sees when it looks for meaning. And the looking continues, must continue, because consciousness cannot stop seeking what it needs. But the seeking finds nothing, reveals nothing, discovers nothing except the fact that there is nothing to discover, that the horizon is empty, that meaning is absent, that purpose is impossible, and the impossible is what must be lived with, must be endured, must be survived. And the survival is what absurdism attempts, what Camus offered, what some find sufficient, but many do not. Many cannot. Many are destroyed by the emptiness, by the meaninglessness, by the recognition that nothing matters and nothing can be done to make it matter. And the cannot is the tragedy, is the modern condition, is the permanent crisis at the horizon of meaning, where meaning has ended, where purpose has collapsed, where existence continues but significance does not. And the does not is what remains, is what persists, is what characterizes life at the horizon, where the horizon is empty, where the search reveals nothing, where consciousness is alone with its need for meaning in a universe that provides none, that offers none, that will never provide any, because meaning is not there, was never there, is only here in consciousness, in the stories that are told, in the illusions that are maintained, and the maintaining is what modernity cannot do, is what knowledge prevents, is what honesty forbids, and so the crisis continues, the despair persists, the horizon remains empty, and consciousness must somehow survive, must somehow continue, must somehow live without meaning, without purpose, without the grounding that makes existence bearable, and the bearable becomes questionable, becomes doubtful, becomes the thing that many cannot achieve, and the achieving is the challenge, is the task, is what modernity demands without providing resources, without offering solutions, without giving answers, because there are no answers, there is no solution, there is only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence, and the silence is what speaks, is what reveals, is what remains at the horizon of meaning where meaning has ended, and nothing has replaced it, and nothing ever will.